Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Ducksy Gaming. I'm going to be releasing a series of videos on League Starter builds, and this is the first of those. Now they're going to be slightly different from normal build guides. The idea really behind these is that they're builds to be used as a starter point for a particular archetype of character, with the goal being that you can progress from these generic characters to the specific endgame build that you would like to play. Now the reason I brought this out is from personal experience. A lot of build guides cover leveling to at 10 really well, and then they also go into detail into the end game min-max build, but the bit in between can be a mystery to some players, and a lot of people I've seen drop builds as they struggle to go from the beginning to start maps to the end game gear. So each build that we look at, I'm not going to play for more than 20 in-game hours, and then I'm going to summarize the build, my experience with it, and then the pros and cons with the build. I'll also not be interacting with the league mechanic just to keep it ethical. Now, I'm also going to be 100% honest, so even after spending 2 to 3 days playing the build, creating the guide and the video, if there's aspects I don't like, then I'll let you know. Now, each build guide is also going to come with a leveling POB and a POB at the point that I stopped playing the character. It's also going to have detailed notes within the leveling POB about how to progress at each stage. Each guide's also going to come with a loot filter to use whilst you're leveling. So I want to keep the videos fairly short with just a summary of the leveling, early maps, and then gear progression, along with how I felt the build performed. So the first build we're going to look at is the Necromancer Summoner. This build can be used to comfortably progress to level 85 plus within the first 20 hours, and then can be used as a really good base to transition into something more endgame like a spectre build. So let's summarize the build from start to finish. So in regards to a rating, I would give this 4.5 out of 5 for leveling. DPS is ample and the speed is pretty reasonable. The only downside I could give is that we use a lot of sockets, so changing gear once you get your first set of gear with links in can be quite difficult. However, we do end up with so much life from the tree that all we really need to worry about for gear is resists. So let's just go through the first few gem links that you're looking for and really when to switch to certain points of the build. So what you're looking for very early on is going to be Summon Raging Spirits linked with minion damage and then Summon Phantasm. Alongside that, you want a Holy Flame Totem, again with Summon Phantasm and with Combustion. And then separately, just have a Flame Wall. Obviously, you'd have your movement skills on whatever else you want, but they're the main links that you need. Basically, we carry on with that really until Act 4. If you get a 4 link, then you can add extra damage onto those links. And then essentially, you need to do the library quest in Act 3. Once you pick up a golem, I would then switch to zombies, minion life, elemental army, and meat shield. Then a separate link for stone golem and feeding frenzy. And then our main damage is going to be summon skeletons, minion damage, melee splash for clear, melee damage for bosses, and predator support. Along with that, we have a lot of support gems that we run. So you want to run summon skitterbots, convocation, which you can put on left click, desecrate, flesh offering, vitality, clarity, and flame dash. Now you can run spectres once you get nearer to maps. However, I think a cast and damage taken setup might be better, as we're constantly resummoning our skeletons due to how bad the minion AI is, so buffing them up with a spectre is pretty pointless. So I leveled bang on 6 hours, and that's with 3 labs completed and all skill points done. I spent a little bit of time testing different skill variations around that 4. So I think you can comfortably level 5.5 to 6 hours. Now, this is also including me speccing into zombies too early in Act 3, which you can see in the footage, which made for an absolutely awful Dominus fight, and a lot of Act 4 at the beginning was a bit of a struggle, so the time I took could definitely be cut down. Now, for bandits, we kill all. For ascendancies, I recommend going Mindless Aggression, Unnatural Strength, Commander of Darkness, and then Mistress of Sacrifice for your Uber Lab. When your minions are max level and you're kind of 85 level 90, I would then drop Commander of Darkness and then take Bone Barrier. Now, the way I leveled, I took Mistress of Sacrifice before Commander of Darkness to get blocked from Bone Offering. However, I had a pretty torrid time in maps with lots of elemental damage in them as my minions kept dying, so I would recommend Commander of Darkness as your 3rd, then Mistress of Sacrifice as your 4th. In regard to early mapping, it's an absolute breeze, especially once you pick up a 5 link and add Brutality into your skeletons. You're set up till pretty much late yellow maps. Single target is really, really good. However, clear speed, although it's good, it's not the best. It's not slow, but skeletons struggle with large groups of rare enemies. Skeletons do damage by there being lots of them. You've got 9 skeletons, so the single target's good because they're all hitting the same target. When you get 5, 6 or 7 rare enemies, such as in an ultimatum or a King Harvey pack, it can be a real struggle. Again, this might be because I did not take Mistress of Sacrifice, so some of my minions were dying. But overall, I think you really need a 6-inch to tackle content where there's lots of difficult monsters all in the same place. And I did spend a lot of time playing around with different combinations. I had spectres as main damage, I had zombies as main damage, I had all 3 combined. But each time I came back to zombies and golem as support and skellies as damage dealers. Now, by the time the footage finished, I finished my character, I had my first 12 watchstones with little trouble, and I ended up with over 60 completion bonus. Now, in regards to how to map, summon skeletons, you need to regularly summon them, because once they get a screen away, they basically disappear. The AI on them is terrible, and convocation doesn't work on skeletons. For bosses, you only really need to swap your melee splash for melee single target on conquerors. Essentially, you summon your skeletons, you do your offering, you hit your flask, and then you target boss with signal prey, and then you just dodge and watch it die. In regard to mid-tier mapping, sort of T9+, again, this is absolutely fine for the most part, and single target is still really good. But as I said, you might come across issues if you out maps and they get really high monster life, or they get nemesis or beyond, and you get a few rare monsters. It can take a little time to get them down. It's not difficult, it's just a little bit frustrating because the real DPS for mobs isn't there when there's lots of them. Skeletons excel when you can target one mob with signal prey and then take it down. That gets difficult when there's maybe 5 or 6 rares and then 9 or 10 magic monsters. It's really hard to target the monster you want to take down first. Now, in regard to rare maps, I didn't get that far, but what I did was migrate my character to the normal league because I needed to respec some ascendancy points to get the final path of building. So I did run a test T14 map that I out on Awakener level 7, and that was all pretty comfortable. You just have to avoid, like I said, Nemesis Beyond early on. You've got to consider this is still 20 hours into the league starting. The boss went down fairly quick and I felt pretty safe until I didn't spot an exploding corpse and bit the dust. So I then thought, well, I'm on this character anyway, let's just test him out a bit more. So I tried a Guardian map at T14. The only thing I did here was I swapped my 5-link for a 6-link Tabula and brought in Impale. Now this was obviously not as comfortable as the normal T14 map, but it was still doable. Now I took 1 death on the boss because I forgot to bring in a Night Flask, but the life regen really helps us in this fight. We can just let our skellies go, and then we just dodge the mechanics. And I think at level 87 we got 15% XP for the map, so even though I died once, I still progressed my XP bar. Obviously I wouldn't necessarily recommend tackling this content this early, but if you're playing softcore and you don't care about dying, you just want to get to the high tier maps to try and get some big loot drops, then this character can certainly do it. I think with a little bit of improvement from the base build that we've seen, you could easily get the majority of your Atlas complete and get all your watchstones, because you've got to consider we still need to add our 4th ascendancy point in as well. Now, you might die in maps if you go and push to, tier 15 or 16, but if you're softcore, you've got to balance whether, you want to level or whether you want to really try and get some of that expensive gear early on. Now, if you are interested in the build, I recommend the POB for a more detailed account. We've kind of gone through it just briefly here, but the POB breaks stuff down a lot more. So what we'll do now is just wrap up the video with the overall pros and cons of the build and whether I'd recommend it. So in regards to the pros, it's dirt cheap. Like, I ran it on SSF gear. I didn't upgrade anything other than I ended up getting a half decent wand with minion damage on it, and that's about it. Everything else was life and resist. Leveling is really easy and comfortable and really beginner friendly. Single target is extremely good for, a no money build basically. I did do a couple of tier 9 blight maps, and they were absolute breeze because you can just let your minions do the work even if they're just slowing the mobs while you build towers, and I didn't really have to do much. You can get to red maps on, as I said, next to no budget and quickly. It's a perfect base to transition into a Spectre build. And then finally, it is pretty tanky. Even without the block that I had for my Ascendancy, it's high life regen, and then when you do take Mistress of Sacrifice, you're going to get 60% or more block, and that can easily be capped with a Rumi's Flask. In terms of cons, it's not the quickest mapper. It's good. You can do a map in sort of 3 to 4 minutes, but it's not zoom. And when you do get maps with tanky rares and they're in groups or they've got auras, it can be a bit frustrating because it can take time to kill them. And under really heavy elemental damage, when your minions aren't fully leveled, they might die. And that's even with specking into life nodes, which is another point, is you have to spec into a lot of minion life nodes to make sure that your minions stay alive. Another con is it's pretty bad for stuff like Legion. In fact, it's terrible for Legion and ultimatums. But as I said, it makes up for it because it is really, really good at Blight. And then the last con is really the skeleton AI is pretty infuriating. Because there's lots of nodes you can take that add duration. You can get spectres that give you frenzy and power charges. But there's no point when you go screen away, your skeletons basically just wander off and despawn. If skeletons lasted like the 40 seconds, 45, 50 that you can build them to, and convocation work with them, it would just make this build so much more fun. It's viable as it is, but I think if convocation work with skeletons, it would make this build top tier because you can add, buffs to your skeletons and stuff like that, and it would just take the build to the next level. But they're the main pros and cons for the build. Overall, for a rating, if you're an experienced player, I'd probably rate it about 7 out of 10 because there are better builds to use. But this one is really, really simple and straightforward. So for beginners, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. I think it's the perfect build for someone new to the game as it allows you to learn mechanics without being in the line of fire constantly. So I've had a look at path of building, and with a standard 6 link and getting your gems qualitied, with all your minions, this build gets to around 2 million DPS fairly comfortably, which if you know the mechanics of fight, can clear Cirrus, can do all the Conquerors, could do Shaper and Elder. I think it would struggle without a bit more investment to do, the Uber content, but you could farm ample currency with the build. Now, I personally wouldn't push the skeleton side of things much further just because of how infuriating the AI is. So I think it would make more sense to transition into a Spectre build. Now, I'm not a minion player. This is kind of maybe the second time I've dabbled with minions. So I'm not going to provide POBs and pretend I know everything. I think it's probably more useful if I link some channels in the description to all the really good build guides I've seen for minions. And that wraps up this first build guide. I'm going to try and bring at least another 2 or 3 out before league start. I'm just trying to think kind of what sort of character I want to look at next. If you've got any ideas, just leave some comments in the notes. If you have found this video useful, please leave a like and subscribe. If you want to know when I bring more videos out, just click the notification bell. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you all in the next video.